Neckbeards is just dudes with poor grooming. Actually, I don't know when this actually became a meme, so if you guys know, put it in the comments below. Actually, one of my best friends in the whole world has a neckbeard, and he's a pretty nice guy. So I'm not really sure where this thing where neckbeards are creepy people come from, but apparently there's 16 of these stories about neckbeard guys that are not so nice. Hey, you know what? I'm Asian. For me to even grow a beard is friggin' hard, so I envy those with neckbeards. Just don't be creepy. Honestly, man, one of my best friends has a neckbeard. What I realize that people with neckbeards have is that they don't really care how they look. Their grooming is not the best. Maybe that's the thing, but I don't get it. Anyways, guys, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary stories that happen with guys with beards on their necks, so... The creepy asshole next door. Now, the neighborhood I live in is far from sketchy, and I have to say, the neighbors have been amazing except for one dude. This one dude lived next door to us, which is a complete asshole. Convicted sex offender, and his most recent arrest made me think of when we first met. This guy always kept his big dogs barking outside, so my mom went next door to confront him. Unlike myself, my mom is pretty aggressive and confrontational, while I try to avoid conflict as much as possible. But I'll have you know, I'm extremely protective of my family, and I can sense whether a person is good or bad just by reading their body language. This ability has yet to fail me. So, when my mom went to confront him about his dogs, he didn't answer the door. But a couple nights later, I was home alone with my little brother and my mom was at work. The security system we had alerted my phone of a visitor because the man I saw in the picture wasn't someone I recognized. I ignored it. Nothing happened. The next night, the guy comes around again, and this time my mom answers the door. I just sat at a view upstairs, listening to the whole conversation from the living room couch. The man was a complete asshole to my mom, saying if she worked very hard or at all, she wouldn't be home to hear the dogs bark, and she just needed to get a life and stop being lazy. Now, my mom works very, very hard. She's a single parent to me, and a real estate agent who managed about 80 houses at that time. How dare he say that? At this point, I got pretty mad and went to the top of the stairs to get a look at this guy who was calling my anything but lazy mother such a name. It was the same fat ass I saw on the camera the night before. He didn't see me, but he saw my little brother, who had come up from the basement to see what was going on. The guy's tone changed pretty drastically when he saw my 7-year-old brother. He suddenly became uncomfortably nice. My mom got tired of this guy's painfully creepy sing-song voice and shut the door. The man left. About a week goes by. The dogs haven't been hurt at all, and the same dude that had called my mom lazy the previous week came by with a plate full of fresh chocolate chip cookies for us, and apologized far too many times for what he did. I wasn't home when he brought the cookies, but my mom and little brother said they tasted good and offered me some, but I don't eat food created by strangers, especially creepy strangers that call my mom lazy. I eventually just threw the rest of the cookies away because I didn't trust them. Over the course of about 2 months, the guy comes over regularly, inviting us to have barbecues and fires in his backyard fire pit, and remains super, super friendly. He lived in a house with a bunch of roommates, all of which warned my mom about the man's criminal record and creep factor. I also told my mom to just avoid him, and not let my brother alone outside with him around, and to absolutely never go to one of his little BBQs, and she listened. Suddenly, I come home from a weekend with my dad. I'm home for about a month, and the guy was gone. His dogs were never outside, he never came to the door, and the roommates were silent about him. I thought this was weird, considering his piece of shit car was still parked outside, in front of the house. But then I found out why. It turns out, the guy was living off of government handouts. For those last few months he was harassing us, and the guy was registered sex offender, and frequently got DUIs. The fat ass was arrested and charged with yet another DUI in a friend's car, and when they did so, the cops searched his phone. I guess they had other reasons to do this. They found lots, and I mean lots of child porn on it. They also found that shit on his laptop back at his house. The guy was a fucking pedo, who seemed to be trying to get close to me, or more realistically, my little brother. He stood about eye level to me. He was a short, fat, neckbeard looking guy, who I could probably take on in a fight since I'm highly trained in martial arts, to lure him into things that make me nauseous and pissed just thinking about. When I heard that my suspicions were confirmed, my mom had another reason to be proud of her guard dog daughter. She brought me to a really nice sushi restaurant, and I even found a Mountain Dew in the fridge next to a crock pot of chicken soup waiting for me. I'm just glad everything turned out the way that it did, and that dude wasn't given much of a chance to hurt us. Last I heard, he was given a 40-year prison sentence for all the sickening shit he was into, and for someone as grossly fat and probably sick as he, that's a definite life sentence. So, creepy asshole who tried to get close to my family, I'm glad I'll never have to worry about you hurting the ones I love the most. Let's never meet again. Last time using a bus. When I was little, I was with my mother, who went to a PC repair shop to fix my computer. Me and my mother were coming back from the shop and we got into the bus. We sat there a few minutes away from our stop, when suddenly, a large 300-pound man came onto the bus, years 70 to 80 possibly. He was wearing a huge shirt with some inspirational quote on it. His shirt was whitish, with yellow stains all over it. I was pretty sure it was urine. He also had a neckbeard, wore tiny shorts, and had long white hair. The guy made his way and sat right in front of us. My mom and I looked over at each other for a moment, and then back at the man. After a few minutes, the man looked at our computer and then at us, and said in the deepest, creepiest voice possible, "Nice computer you got there," and gave us a look as if he wanted to steal it from us. Our nostrils nearly exploded because of his smell, and then within a second, my mom grabbed the computer with one hand and my wrist with the other and nearly sprinted to the door of the bus, and even though it wasn't our stop, she got off. Creepy guy from the bus. Let's not meet again. Wolfman. Le backstory. My friend and I had a band together when we were younger, around 15 or 16 years old. His dad works at a low-income housing authority, a place where a lot of nearly unemployable people live because, well, they're batshit insane. In the fall, this place would sell baked goods and pumpkins for picking, turn a patio into a haunted house by setting up curtains. It was a tiny thing, but pitch dark inside and had a bunch of creepy Halloween stuff. A couple local bands would play, us included. The festivities were open to the public. La story. My friend and I, and a third kid we're friends with, were chilling around the general area, scaring little kids in the haunted house. We helped set it up and everything. Eventually, my friend's dad tells us that there's someone that wants to help with the haunted house. Okay, cool, whatever. Let's go see what this kid wants. We approach the haunted house and see this short fat man with long black greasy hair, a neckbeard, and a lazy eye. He had a bag with him and spoke in a sort of nasally voice. He introduced himself. I don't really remember his name, honestly. We just all basically referred to him as the Wolfman, and showed us the contents of his bag. He had a mask, cape, fake sword, basically a little creepy getup. Okay. He explained that he wanted to help with the haunted house. What makes his story even creepier is how properly he spoke, like the kind of person that was way too into medieval lore as a teenager. My friends decided to man the door to the haunted house to let kids in. They sent me in with Wolfman. He took one corner of the haunted house and I the other. He gave me specific directions on what to say to the kids that came through, something along the lines of, "Turn back, mortals," etc., etc. I'm not a very good actor, so he would repeatedly harass me about how weak my performance was, and beseech me to become more convincing. When the kids would walk past me and get to him, he would turn on a strobe light and scream in a deep, bellowing voice things like, "Foolish mortals, you have reached hell, and now your souls will be mine." He had made several small children cry. After maybe 20 or 30 minutes alone inside this hut with this crazy murder guy, I decided to ditch him and see what the fuck my friends were doing. Turns out, they had found a gator riding cart and just started driving around without me. Wolfman noticed my absence and came out to seek us out. He caught up to us and basically tried to make friends with us. His namesake came from when he asked us if we liked werewolves, and explained that he's written a series of novels in which werewolves aren't the bad guys, as they always seem to be made out to be in media. He asked if we'd be interested in reading them. Throughout all of this, we're just walking around this festival area, trying like hell to ditch this guy. We sat down to watch an acoustic guitarist perform, and he sat next to us. There was a small audience for the performer, and Wolfman insisted on getting on stage with the guitarist and singing "Eye of the Tiger," of which he only knew the first verse and the chorus. He eventually just left the festival for a while, and we went back to driving the gator. But he came back, and I'll never forget sitting in the back of the gator, yelling at my friend to gun it, because I made eye contact with Wolfman. Later that day, my friend's dad explained that he talked to the guy. We asked him to, because we were pretty friggin' freaked out. Apparently, he explained that he was thinking of purchasing some pumpkins, and would perhaps ask some of the young men he'd met to help carry them back to his house down the road. That was when his dad kicked him out. And somehow everyone was okay with this. Bit of backstory. My mom saw her father last and her brother last when she was a toddler, and was reunited with them 40 years later. My newfound uncle lived with his girlfriend some 200 miles away from us, so we were making trips every other weekend or so to visit them. The girlfriend had kids from prior relationships, many kids, at least 5, probably more. Her eldest was in his early 30s and still lived with her. He was what we now classified as a neckbeard, though this was well before the term. I was 11 or 12 years old at the time. I was a precocious child, so perhaps my behavior or tastes may have indicated something older, but my age wasn't kept a secret, and there were certainly adults in the vicinity at any time who knew exactly how old I was. I had vague memories of him, of having interesting conversations, of him seeming to appreciate my supposed maturity. I, a mere child, stopped in the living room and watched a Hudsucker Proxy with him and understood it. So shocking, much impressed. So, it may sound like I'm leading up to him being a creep, but he actually remains, in my memory at least, a pretty cool guy. So why is my story on here? Well, his mom seemed to encourage our friendship a bit more than one would expect. She seemed to think she was a matchmaker, and would comment on how I was the perfect woman for her son, how he could settle down with me, what a cute couple we made. Once again, I was 11, 12 years old. He was a man in his early 30s. This was America in the 90s, if you're hoping for some cultural explanation. Anyways, the most I remember is us as a family going out to this big breakfast buffet, and the mom being creepily insistent that he drives me back to the house in his truck, ruling out any other passengers who may have needed a ride. She winked at him and suggested he show me the scenic route, so he drove around for a while and pointed out random landmarks in an admittedly history-laden city. Then we went back to the house, where his mom nudge wink winked him the rest of the day. For unrelated reasons, my uncle broke up with her soon afterwards, and we didn't have to go back. Can I buy your shirt? I live on a 150-acre farm, bordered by state gamelands. On this particular day, My best friend Sarah was over. We were in the kitchen gearing up to bake cookies when Sarah said, Kari, there's some dude walking up to your house. This is incredibly strange, because our driveway itself is about 2 miles long, and we never ever get any uncalled for visitors. Sure enough, there's some guy cutting across in front of my house and to my front porch. My dogs are going crazy, and I'm already feeling rather nervous. He had wild gray hair with an equally as wild gray beard, and he was dressed pretty sloppily. He knocked on the door and started calling, "Hello," into the windows. I never had to deal with a situation like this before, and made the stupid decision of opening the door to see what was going on. The screen door was between us, and I was doing what I could to bar Rambo, my little Boston Terrier lab mix, from shoving the door opening and attacking the gap, while Stanley, my pit mix, watched with interest from the nearby couch. He said it was okay to let them out because he liked dogs, and I said no because I could tell by Rambo's demeanor that she was feeling threatened by how he'd been yelling outside before, and she typically does get like that when new people get that close to the house without meeting her outside first. Anyways, this guy tells me his name is Bobby, and immediately says that he used to come out to the farm 20 years ago. I believe him because the farm was a pretty busy place back then, and a lot of folks used to come out and drink and swim. I started thinking that I was a little hasty in my judgment of him when he starts going into detail about people I know and what things used to be like back then. I come outside, and my friend Sarah stays inside. I start to feel a bit more comfortable and begin sharing some stories that I've heard about that time. Suddenly, the conversation takes a huge nosedive. He starts telling me about his lying wife putting a restraining order on him and says something to the effect of, "If I wanted to hurt that bitch, she wouldn't be breathing." And then he talks about his sister taking custody of his daughter from him a long time ago, says she was lying too, and what a nasty woman is that. Not only were these subjects just awfully personal and random, but he was becoming extremely agitated as he spoke. He was sitting in one of our rocking chairs at this point, and he was asking for water, so I went in and grabbed a bottle, thinking that he might leave once he got it. Sarah was on the phone with her dad, an influential car dealership owner with a lot of connections, and she was telling him what was going on. He said to call the cops. I said to hold on. I was going to give him water and tell him to leave. But he just kept talking. He told me that he was certified crazy and in and out of mental hospitals. He said he couldn't legally buy guns anymore, but that he had some in the truck he'd had for a long time, and asked me if I wanted to come see them. At this point, he gestured to a lower field, nearest to the road, and I could see his shitty truck parked there along the old railroad bed. I told him I totally didn't want to see his guns and really started feeling nervous. He asked me if he could buy my shirt off of me, and I told him that he could buy it for $9 at Walmart. It was just some Darth Vader expression shirt that caught my eye when I was passing the men's section. I sure as hell wasn't about to strip my shirt off and give it to some random creep who wouldn't get his ass out of my rocking chair. I started making up excuses about how Sarah and I had errands we needed to run so that he would leave, and he started to get up from the rocker, but then just sat back down and kept talking. He started talking about some doctor he met at the mental hospital who apparently did some wrong, and he started becoming irate again. Sarah was calling me into the house and I went inside. She called the police, and they wanted to ask me questions. I took the phone, and the first thing they asked me was if he was on bath salts, as if I would have any fucking idea. I said I didn't know, but the guy seemed really off balance. They said they'd be on their way. I hung up and went back to the screen door, knowing it'd be at least a half hour to 45 minutes before they get there. We live so far out that a fast response is impossible. I didn't come back outside. I just stayed by the screen door and kept squeezing in excuses for him to leave whenever I could find a break in his rantings. He just kept half rising out of the chair and sitting back down like he did before. Sarah was back on the phone with her dad, who just came to realize that he knew the guy. Apparently, he's some local weirdo who occasionally comes into the shop and does basically the same thing until he becomes super firm and makes him leave. We give the phone to the guy and Sarah's dad tells him, "You need to leave, you're scaring the girls." And the guy walks away from the house and starts pacing, arguing with her dad, and saying that he didn't do anything wrong. Sarah's dad keeps telling him that he understands, but he really needs to leave. A while into the conversation, the cops rip up the driveway and start talking to him. One of them gets a story from Sarah and I, and then they're both down there talking to him again. I can hear the guy saying he wants to sit down. It's a hot day and I could see why. Anyways, he makes a few steps towards a big concrete block atop the sewer, and suddenly, one of the cops grabs him, knocks him over his leg, and sends him backwards down the hill from the driveway. The guy falls on the back of his neck and starts crying. They cuff him and tell him that they told him not to move and that he needs to fucking listen. I felt horrible because I thought that was excessive force. The guy was trying not to let the cops get a word in edgewise and just kept trying to rant the same way he did with me, but they were firmer with him. When he was in the car, the cops came to me and took an official statement. Apparently, this guy had been causing some trouble, and they've been trying to get him for things, but nothing stuck. They felt he was dangerous, and the cop kept stressing to me that he really wanted me to go to court and take this seriously. We still haven't gotten any summons, but I heard that Bobby was picked up recently for holding a young girl at gunpoint and molesting her. I really hope that he stays put away, because I can't even aptly describe how wildly angry this man became at the drop of a hat. That sort of person is just not safe. I hope the best for that young girl, and I'm glad she's still alive, because he's got a history of violence, and he's obviously mentally unstable. I could absolutely see that he could have possibly killed her just as easily as he let her live. What's odd is that I heard even more recent that he's back out, and that makes me nervous, because I know he'll eventually be getting a court summons in the mail pertaining to what happened at the farm, and I'm worried that it'll really piss him off and he'll be right back. I'm just grateful for the castle doctrine. I'll absolutely be ready to defend myself if he comes out here all kinds of crazy. If it weren't for the right to bear arms and the castle doctrine, I'm sure I'd be long dead by the time the cops showed up if he really meant me harm. Note, Sarah and I are both 23. He said he was my boyfriend. Now, I don't really know how to start this story, but I guess I'll give it a go. It might not be the most scariest story in the world, but to me, it was. Basically, this happened last year while I was working at an adult novelty store. I had been recently engaged at the time, and practically everyone knew, from coworkers to family to friends and even people in my apartment. They all knew. I was working the weekend shift, trying to make extra money for the wedding. I made my money off of sales, and to be honest, I was quite great at it. The late night and weekend crowd didn't bring out some of the oddballs, but none of them compared to this guy. It was around 2 hours till closing, on this one Friday night. My shift lead and I were shooting the breeze about favorite TV shows, what have you. We noticed this guy, waiting to be buzzed into the store. He was twitching a little bit, but we just took that as nerves for being a first-timer. We were an adult novelty store. My shift lead buzzes this guy in. He's short, pretty round, dirty messy blonde hair, and a weird peach fuzz neckbeard. The guy walks in and looks directly at me. His eyes were so wide, I felt like I was about to become this guy's dinner. We both greet him like we would any customer, and ask if he needs any help finding a particular item. He blushes and goes to the back of the store, where the women's lingerie is located. After a couple minutes, we heard this guy moaning. My shift lead went to check on him, and the guy immediately stopped. The creeper returned to the front of the store, walked right up to my counter and asked me if we carried any fleshlights. I told him no, we didn't, and gave him a card for a website that does. He was surprised by how nonchalant I was about the website, and even told him about all the types that they carry. As I was talking the whole time, he was staring at my boobs, and the shift lead, being the bluntest woman I know, screamed at him, "Her eyes are just due north of those melons, you idiot!" The creeper then glared at her, and then asked me if he could purchase some Durex XXL condoms. Now, Durex XXL extra large condoms are the longest condoms on the market, approximately 9.5. My shift lead and I had to hold back our laughter. This guy surely did not have that kind of schlong, no offense, but we would rather you get a condom that fits rather than you try to impress us. Now at this point, I didn't care what size he was, so I rang him up. He exited the store, and we busted out laughing. My shift ended uneventful after that, and I made my way home to my fiancée. The next day, I left my apartment and noticed there was a note pinned next to my door. It read, "Hope to see you soon," with a heart that had a big smiling grin. I thought it was my fiancé and texted him, but he never left me a note at all. Weird. Later that evening, I went to work, clocked in, actually took a huge friggin' sale for a bachelorette party, and talked with my shift lead until we closed. I drove home and got a call from my fiancé. He said when he arrived home this evening, there was a note pinned to our door that read, "I miss you beautiful," with another heart that had a big grin on it. My now husband wanted to know who was leaving them and told our apartment security, and they kept an eye out on this whole situation. This went on for another 2 weeks. I would arrive home and see a note pinned to the door. The notes themselves, though, would get weirder and weirder. One of them read, "I love that dress that you wore last night. You're such a bombshell." We couldn't figure out what time of day this person was leaving notes. That is, until one night at 5 in the morning, a security guard came knocking at my door. The security guard told us that they got the guy that had been leaving us notes and showed me the guy's picture to see if I recognized him. I nearly dropped the dude's phone. It was the creeper that came to my work. The round, dirty blonde hair, peach fuzz neckbeard guy. I almost hurled. My fiance asked how they got the guy. Apparently, an hour ago, security was making their late night round and noticed the guy was just sitting on the hood of his car in front of our apartment. They made their way towards him, asked what he was doing there, and he told them, "I'm waiting on my girlfriend." They asked him, "Which apartment does your girlfriend reside in?" and he pointed directly at ours. The guards took him away, called the police, and found out he had a camera filled with pictures of me while I was leaving work, while I was leaving my apartment, while I was getting the mail, shopping for groceries, and while at a bar. Soy milk. Last summer, I went and bought a carton of chocolate soy milk to drink while I was waiting for my bus to come, when this creepy neckbeard guy, giving off all sort of bad vibes, unfortunately shows up and makes himself comfy next to me. I can feel him looking me up and down, so I get pissed off and ask him, "What?" He just smirks, grimaces more like it, and tells me that soy milk is good for making boobs bigger, and I apparently learned that while he was doing that anime Japan pilgrimage thing weebos live for. As if telling me that and other gross, racist, misogynist things wasn't creepy enough, he decided to also add that I must probably drink a whole jug of soy milk every day, because apparently I've got really big nice boobs, like some anime character. They're like a D cup, right? Wink. At this point, I was just super scared and angry. I just wanted to ride to the subway station, not deal with this real-life creepy PM situation. So I decided to call my sister and pretend it's my dad, and pretend that he's a police officer, all while glaring at this perv, who finally has the audacity to look somewhat scared. At this point, I've given up on the bus, so I just jump up and start running to my house, so grateful I live nearby, and I never saw that weirdo again. And hopefully I never will. The rutabaga, Hello. I specifically joined Reddit so that I can share my story here in Let's Not Meet. These events took place during a 15-year period, and much to my dismay, I don't believe we have seen the end of it just quite yet. I grew up in a small town, in a nice neighborhood that was surrounded by little patches of forest that separated houses and even entire blocks from another. These patches were all connected with trails that eventually led to the actual big forest that started from behind my parents' house. One of the smaller trails ran behind my parents' house. This is important. Basically, this neighborhood was every child's dream to grow up in. All the neighbors knew each other, so it was a safe neighborhood too. There were lots of other kids to play with, and the endless but familiar trails provide the most exciting surroundings for games. I was never afraid to play by myself in the forest, or to walk home from a friend's house after dark. I would sleep with my drapes open and not think much of it, and my parents hardly ever locked the doors for the night. This all changed when the rutabaga showed up. For all I know, he could have been living in the area for years, watching us kids, before he got bolder and eventually made his first known appearance. I was 11 or 12 years old at the time, and I was sitting in my bed in my underwear, reading a book at around 11 p.m. at night, when all of a sudden, my mom burst into the room without knocking or saying anything. She stared out of my window into the darkness of the forest for a solid minute, before I finally asked her what in the world was going on. Without taking her eyes off the forest, she started shutting my drapes and sort of muttered, There was some bearded man behind, let's call them the Thompsons. The Thompsons' window staring at their daughter. The hair on my neck stood up as I grabbed my blankets and covered myself, shocked and disgusted. The Thompsons' daughter had been surfing on the internet in their computer room. Remember when families still had those? When she looked up, and the rutabaga had been staring at her through the window, just inches away, his face pressed on the glass. They called the cops, but by the time they got to the Thompsons, the peeping Tom was long gone. But at least now, we had some sort of description of the man. He had a messy orange beard, a messy orange hair, big glasses, and very bad skin. We were all pretty shooken up by this sudden intrusion of privacy in our safe little community bubble. This first appearance happened during the darkening nights of the fall. This is important. And the second during the following winter, in very similar circumstances. My friend was in the computer room alone. She had looked up and out the window and screamed in utter horror as she saw a man staring back at her from the darkness. Her father, who was at home at this time, didn't waste a second and he ran out of the door yelling. But by the time he reached the computer room's window, the sneaky pervert had already escaped and was nowhere to be found. After this incident, nobody saw the rutabaga for a while. The spring came and the evenings got lighter. I don't remember why I started calling him the rutabaga. But by the time the summer came, everyone in the neighborhood was using that name. Then the summer turned into another fall, and as soon as it started to get dark outside again, he was spotted behind another family's window, this time a good 2 blocks away from ours. I've been sleeping with my curtains closed and my door locked for a year now, and for the first time in my life, I was creeped the fuck out to come home from a friend's house after dark, mostly because a large portion of my journey home was along these trails that connected the forest patches, and it became very clear to everyone very soon that the rutabaga was using these same trails to get from one block to another without being noticed. Since this was such a long time ago, I don't remember the timeline of the events exactly, apart from the first one, but after 2 or 3 years, the fall was everyone's cue to shut the drapes. We had a hunting dog in our front yard, so it was rather difficult to sneak behind one of our windows without being greeted by loud barking. But eventually, the rutabaga solved the dog problem, too. Another dark winter passed, and in spring, I, my kid brother, and our friends decided to play a detective game in the safety of the sunny daylights. We were going to find out which trails the rutabaga used. Sounds quite impossible, right? Well, not really. since he left little breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts behind whenever he was peeping at a family. So, my little brother and I actually discovered this when we were playing in that little trail that runs behind my parents' house. The snow had finally melted, and I think we were cycling along the trail when we noticed something white and blue under this huge, bushy spruce. Of course, we had to investigate what it was, being our backyard spruce and all. There were dozens of breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts. It didn't take us long to notice that from the safety of this big tree, one could easily see right into our living room, and the dog in the front yard would never know you were there. We told our friends about our discovery, and soon we were all searching for more candy wrappings and cigarette butts from the close vicinity of each of our homes, and we found plenty. There was always a big tree or a rock or something where he could watch one or two houses at the same time. After following this trail of candy wrappings, we found his camp. It was located behind a small hill, just 100 yards away from my cousin's house. There were remains of a campfire, empty vodka bottles, and probably hundreds of breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts. We were quite freaked out. But I and my brother decided to mindfuck him for a change. We took one of the empty bottles, filled it with candy wrappings and cigarette butts, went back home, and placed the bottle right under the spruce where he had been stalking our family for so long. A few days later, we went to check it out, and the bottle had been smashed into teeny tiny pieces in what seemed like a fit of rage. It was our way of saying, "Fuck you, asshole, we see you," and I think he got the message. That summer, we heard that on the other side of the forest patch that was next to our house, a woman had woken up in the middle of the night because she felt like someone was staring at her. She had gone up to find her house back door wide open. She didn't see anyone, but we all knew who had been inside her house. The rutabaga was definitely getting bolder, and while we had thought he didn't operate during the summertime because of the light nights, we couldn't have been more wrong. He avoided our block but terrorized all the other blocks which were around us. People would always wake up to the sound of someone groping the outdoor handles or someone walking in their yards at night. He'd also been to a couple of other houses as well, getting in through the back door and leaving before the sleepy family could fathom that someone was in their bedroom. Then all of a sudden, these creepy incidences stopped. Also by now, people were most certainly locking their doors and taking precautions. For 2 years, nothing happened. But we finally realized who the rutabaga was. Less than 2 blocks away from my house lived an alcoholic man in his mid-30s. He fit the description of the peeping Tom, and he had been sentenced to prison for drunk driving. So we all knew who the fucker was, and he knew that we knew. But the cops couldn't arrest him for what he'd done, because he hadn't been caught red-handed, nor had anyone ever properly seen his face in the darkness. Another few years passed, and nothing weird happened. We heard that he was in prison again for drunk driving. Again. It almost seemed like the rutabaga had retired from terrorizing his neighbors. His name had turned into a bit of a joke, a bit of an urban legend. Anyways, for years, I've been afraid of this creepy asshole lurking in my forest, but now, when people spoke of him, it was more like, "Oh, he's in prison again. Well, at least he can't stalk anyone there, haha." But the rutabaga came back. This happened about 3 to 5 years ago. It's now even harder for me to keep track on things that have happened in my old neighborhood, since I haven't lived there for years. But my parents are still there, and so is he. Earlier, I mentioned that he had some sort of a camp near my cousin's house. My cousins lived about a block away from my parents' house. My uncle had 2 hunting dogs, and their cages are located in their backyard, about 30 yards away from the closest forest trail. My 2 little girl cousins, I think their ages at the time were around 10 and 13 years old, were going to sleep in a tent that night in the backyard. It was a warm summer night, and they had 2 big dogs to guard them, so why not? Also, their parents were at home. So they go to sleep in their tent, and my uncle is sleeping in the house in his bedroom with a window that faces the backyard. At around 3 a.m., his hunting dogs are going batshit crazy, barking and howling like there is no fucking tomorrow. He doesn't think much of it at first. I mean, can't really blame him. His dogs bark at fucking pine cones falling from the trees. But as the ruckus gets louder and louder and much, much louder, he gets up to go check on the dogs. He opens the blind just in time to see an unknown man with a messy beard opening the zipper into his daughter's tent, the girl screaming in terror inside. My uncle chased the fucker through the forest, but the rutabaga had a car waiting for him in the trail, and once again he got away. The girls themselves were shocked, but unharmed. Now, I wish I could say that this voyeuristic asshole is behind bars, but he's not. He's still living in the same house, right next to the people he's been stalking and harassing for over a decade. But what can you do? There's no solid evidence against him, and he hasn't actually hurt anyone, even after he tried to crawl into my cousin's tent. I think the cops are just not taking this perv seriously, to be honest. I also run into him quite frequently in a grocery store when I'm visiting my parents. And the way he just fucking stares at me makes my fucking skin crawl. I can tell that he knows who I am, and there's no rational reason for him to recognize me in public unless he's been stalking me. The street where my parents live is a dead end. There's nothing but forest and a few neighbors surrounding them. And that fuckhead lives on the other side of the district. So he really shouldn't know who I am. Unless... Now, I haven't heard about him for years now, but I find it hard to believe that he would just stop, considering how bold he had gone with his antics. I just hope that nobody gets hurt when he decides to try something bolder than crawling into the tent of 2 underaged girls. If we meet in the trail, rutabaga. I hope I'm carrying a Lucille with me.